Have you ever chased a dream so fiercely, only to find that when you arrived, it wasn't what you imagined at all? Elijah Carter thought he was buying solitude, peace, and a chance to begin again. But when he rode up to Silver Creek Ranch, he found 3 towering women already living there, women who claimed the land was theirs, bound by promises made long before he came. Imagine traveling 3 hard days, every penny of your savings invested, only to be told by strangers that your future now belongs to them. What would you do? Stand your ground, walk away, or face the possibility that life was about to change in ways you never prepared for? And here lies the deeper question: is love always something we choose, or does it sometimes choose us? In the most unlikely of places tonight, you'll walk the same dirt path Eli did. You'll feel his doubts, his fear, and the stirring hope that perhaps belonging can be found where we least expect it. Stay with us and let this story unfold. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another tale from the frontiers of the heart. The deed felt heavier than it had any right to as Elijah Carter sat tall in his saddle, staring at the weathered farmhouse of Silver Creek Ranch. It was supposed to be empty. Instead, 3 women stood firm on the wide porch, their towering figures outlined against the late afternoon sun. The tallest of them, built broad through the shoulders with arms like she could wrestle down a steer, stepped forward with a smile that never reached her piercing blue eyes. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice calm but edged with authority, the kind that sent an uneasy ripple crawling up Eli's spine. The other 2 women held their ground at her flanks, every bit as imposing, their watchful gazes sharp and assessing, as if they were sizing him up like stock at auction. Eli had spent 3 long days crossing rough trails to reach this place, all his savings tied up in what he'd been told was good ranching land. The remoteness had appealed to him: freedom from town gossip and entanglements, a chance to start clean. But now, staring at these strangers who claimed his ground as their own, that solitude felt less like promise and more like a snare. "Ladies, there must be some mistake," Eli said evenly, though tension crawled along the back of his neck. He raised the parchment in his hand, its notary seal unbroken. "This land is mine now. I've got the papers to prove it." The tall woman's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too sharp to be friendly. "Oh, we know who you are." "Elijah Carter," she replied, his name rolling off her tongue with unsettling familiarity. "We've been waiting for you." The words cut through him like a cold wind. How could they know his name? The seller had promised the deal was private, yet here they were, speaking with certainty as if his arrival had been foretold. "We've been here a long while," the darker-haired woman said, her deep voice carrying from the porch. "We've tended this land, kept it alive, kept it warm." The way she drew out that last word made his stomach twist with unease. The third woman, a freckled redhead with green eyes and a husky laugh, added, "The last man who held this deed made arrangements with us before he left. Arrangements that don't vanish just because you wave a slip of paper." Their stares pressed against Eli's chest like a physical weight. This wasn't a case of squatters confused about boundaries, nor some harmless neighbors passing by. Their presence here was deliberate, calculated, and it made him question just what he'd bought into. The seller, Silas Granger, had all but shoved the papers into Eli's hands, eager to close quickly. Now Eli wondered if he'd stepped into a snare. "What sort of arrangements?" he asked carefully, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. The tall woman's eyes glinted. The kind that mean you'll be staying with us. Permanently. She let the pause hang, then added, with a weight that chilled him to the bone. You'll share more than the land. Elijah. That's the way of it. The word struck like a blow. Not a flirtation. Not a joke, something far more unsettling. His hand inched toward the rifle tied to his horse, but he froze midway. This wasn't ordinary frontier loneliness. This was something deeper, stranger. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Eli said, forcing iron into his voice, though his gut churned. But I paid good money for this land, and I'm not walking away. He swung down from his saddle, slow and deliberate, never breaking eye contact with the towering woman. She chuckled, low and humorless. Game. Oh no, Mr. Carter. This is business. She swept an arm toward the farmhouse, her presence commanding. The man who sold you this land owed us a debt. Debts don't vanish just because he ran off with your gold. The redhead stepped down, her boots thudding against the steps like a gavel. Silas Granger promised he'd work alongside us, promised he'd be our partner in every way that mattered. When he failed, he swore the next owner would take up that mantle. Her green eyes locked on him, unyielding. That would be you. Eli felt the first spark of real panic flicker in his chest. Silas Granger, that was indeed the seller's name. He had introduced himself simply as Mark, but the truth was now plain. These women knew more about the transaction than they had any right to. Even if that's true, and I doubt it, Eli said sharply, no man can bind another with such promises. The dark-haired woman gave a humorless laugh. You don't understand, do you? Out here, far from the law and any sheriff's ear, it isn't papers that matter. We make our own rules. Her emphasis on rules made Eli's skin prickle. He was beginning to understand. This was about more than land or debts. He had stepped straight into a snare spun by three women who had their own code, and somehow he was now entangled in it. Eli Carter tightened his grip on the deed, though the paper felt suddenly flimsy in his calloused hands. Whatever Silas Granger had promised these women before running off with Eli's gold, it had nothing to do with him. This contract you speak of isn't mine to honor, Eli said, his voice firm, though his gut betrayed him. I bought this ranch fair and square, and the rest of it is between you and Silas. The tall woman, Maeve Hollister, though he did not know her name yet, let her smile slip into something colder. She stepped off the porch, boots striking the ground with a weight that made the boards creak behind her. She stood near 6 feet tall, her frame built from years of hard work in the fields. Out here, Mr. Carter, papers mean less than muscle and grit. A deed signed in Fort Bridger won't do you much good when you're 3 days from the nearest lawman. Eli's pulse quickened, but he stood his ground. Then the red-haired woman, freckles bright against sun-darkened skin, reached into her pocket and pulled free a folded document. With careful fingers, she opened it and held it out for him to see. Silas Granger put his name to this, Josephine McGraw said, and it states clear enough that whoever owns this land inherits every obligation he made to us, even from a few feet away. Eli recognized the heavy paper stock, the official seal at the bottom, the looping flourish of Silas's signature. His heart sank. Had he been tricked into buying not just a ranch, but some kind of snare? He remembered how eager Granger had been to close the sale. The man hadn't even argued the price, had practically shoved the deed across the table. Eli thought he'd found himself a bargain. Now he wondered if he'd simply been sold into an arrangement meant for someone else. Still, there was something strange in the way the three women carried themselves, for all their intimidation. Eli sensed something beneath it, an edge of longing, a weight of hurt. Maeve's eyes lingered on him in a way that wasn't only about dominance. Josie's stance held tension like a bowstring, but there was also pain in the tight set of her jaw, and the dark-haired one, Clara, watched him not only with suspicion, but with something else he couldn't name. "You're bluffing," Eli said, though the words lacked conviction. No court in Wyoming Territory would uphold a contract like that. Clara Boone stepped forward at that, her boots kicking up dust as she came down from the porch. Her movements were fluid, sure, like someone who had never lost a fight in her life. "Who said anything about courts?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "We don't need them. We keep our own justice on this land." Eli instinctively took a step back. His mouth had gone dry. It was then the tall woman spoke her name. "I'm Maeve Hollister," she said, her tone softening slightly. She gestured to the dark-haired woman. "This is Clara Boone." Then to the redhead, who offered a little wave that carried as much warning as welcome. "And that's Josie McGraw. We've been waiting for you. Mr. Carter. Silas described you to us in detail." Eli's stomach knotted. The thought of Silas speaking about him, his appearance, his character while arranging this twisted handoff made his skin crawl. "Whatever he told you," Eli said, "he had no right. I bought Silver Creek Ranch in good faith, and I won't be tied down by promises I never made." Maeve tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. For the first time, her gaze flickered with something more vulnerable. "Good faith," she repeated, almost wistfully. "That's a rare thing. Silas had none of it left when he walked out of here. By the end, he was nothing but empty charm and excuses." Her words landed heavy. Eli felt the weight of her honesty. Clara moved closer, circling him like a wary predator. Yet there was a gentleness in her eyes. "Silas came with grand speeches about partnership," she said. "Told us we'd build something lasting here together. But before 3 months were out, he was scheming his escape." Josie's voice broke in, raw and edged with emotion. "He used us, took our labor, our trust, our affections, and threw them aside. Then he sold this place right out from under us, pocketed the money, and left us to pick up the pieces." The picture was becoming clearer, though it gave Eli no comfort. These weren't squatters, nor simple tricksters. They were women left betrayed, abandoned by a man who had bound them with empty promises. And now, in their eyes, Eli was either their chance at salvation or the target of their vengeance. Maeve closed the last steps between them until Eli caught the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin, the kind of detail that only unsettled him more. "You see, Carter, we got a claim here, not just to the ranch, but to what Silas promised us. He made commitments work, livelihood, companionship, and then broke everyone. We're not about to let all we built slip away." Eli's eyes searched her face, looking past the intimidation. He noticed the way her jaw tightened when she spoke Silas's name, the tremor in her fingers she tried to hide. The betrayal had left scars far deeper than a failed business deal, and despite himself, Eli felt something stir. Beneath the danger, beneath the uncertainty, there was something magnetic in Maeve's presence. Clara's quiet strength, Josie's fiery independence. It pulled at him in ways that unsettled his reason. He forced himself to push through the confusion. "If there's truly a contract," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his tone, "then I'll see it with my own eyes." Josie stepped forward, carefully unfolding the document with deliberate precision. She handed it over, and Eli took it, scanning the lines by the fading light. The paper was thick, expensive. At the bottom, Silas Granger's signature curled boldly beside an official notary seal. But as Eli read, confusion twisted deeper instead of clearing. "This isn't about debts or wages," he said slowly. This is a partnership agreement." His eyes moved over phrases that felt oddly crafted terms about farming operations, profit sharing, and then, most curious of all, a clause promising mutual support and companionship for all parties involved. The words sat heavy on his tongue. Legally binding. Yes, but vague enough to mean 100 different things. Clara stepped beside him, her nearness distracting in ways he hadn't anticipated. Silas was clever with his tongue. She said, "He made business sound like romance, and romance sound like business. We should have known better, but we believed him." Maeve's eyes never left Eli's face as he read. "We kept this ranch alive. Carter, the irrigation system, the herds, the trading routes, we built all of it. Silas reaped the benefits for a season, then cut and ran when it suited him. And according to that contract, the obligations fall to the next man who holds this land." Josie's green eyes flashed with anger. "That means you." Eli lowered the paper slowly, his mind racing. This was no ordinary dispute. He had stepped into a web woven long before his arrival, and these three women meant to see it honored. And though his instinct told him to resist, another part of him, quieter but stronger, whispered that maybe this was not a trap at all, but the beginning of something he had not expected to find. Eli read the parchment a second time, tracing each careful line as if steadiness could be borrowed from the ink. The wording was slippery, every phrase polished until it could pass for either a business plan or a promise of something deeper. He felt the old anger rise at Silas Granger, a man who could talk a river into changing course and then blame the water when it flooded. Eli lowered the page and looked from one woman to the next. He saw no triumph in their faces. What he saw was resolve scraped raw by disappointment. Clara Boone stepped close enough that he could catch a hint of flour and clean cotton on her. She did not crowd him, but her presence had a way of asking for an answer. Silas wrapped his schemes in ribbon and called it partnership. She said, "He mixed accounts and affection until you could not tell where the ledger ended and the heart began. We should have known better. We worked too hard to let a smooth tongue fool us." Her words were plain, but there was no shame in them, only a level look that told him she had decided who she would be after the fall. Maeve Hollister studied Eli with the care of a rancher reading weather. "The land has paid its keep under our hands," she said. "We cut new ditches from the spring above the cottonwoods. We turned soil that had been left tired and gave it rest and rotation. We barter beef and grain 2 days' ride from here and never come home empty." Silas ate from the same table, took the credit when it suited him, and when he grew restless, he sold out fast and left us to answer for his debts. Her voice did not rise, but the words landed like fence posts tamped firm in clay. Josie McGraw kept her arms folded around herself as if to hold back the heat in her blood. "He told us this contract would shelter what we built," she said, tapping the page with a freckled finger. "He said it named what we were to each other and would outlast temper and trouble. Then he packed his pride and our money and rode for parts unknown. All he left was a paper that says the next man to hold this deed stands where he stood." She met Eli's gaze and did not look away. "That is you." Eli weighed the paper in his hand, as if heft alone could judge a bargain. The clause about mutual support and companionship rang in his ears. It was the kind of phrase a clever man could sell in a warm room with a bottle uncorked. He thought about the miles behind him, about the silence he thought he wanted, and about the way this porch felt like the far edge of a map he had not meant to walk off. "Even if this ink holds," he said, "I did not make these promises. I cannot be bound by what another man swore. That is the road to ruin anywhere, even out here." For a heartbeat, something unguarded crossed Maeve's face. "You are likely right about the law," she said quietly. "A judge in Fort Bridger might laugh this language out of his office. But we have put everything we have into this place. There is no other home hidden up the trail for us." The words were not a plea, not quite. They were a truth laid level on the table. The porch seemed to breathe with them, boards settling under sun and weight. Eli felt his certainty shift. These women were not here to bluff a drifter. They had thrown their backs into this ranch until the soil knew their names. He could walk away and leave a quarrel and a contract behind him. He could also walk away from a chance he did not yet understand. He looked at Clara and saw in her steadiness a kind of hope that did not beg. He looked at Josie and saw stormlight looking for a place to break. He looked at Maeve and saw a shield someone had learned to carry long before today. "What is it you want from me?" he asked, not to stall, but to hear the shape of it in their own voices. "Do not dress it up. Say it plain." Maeve answered without turning to the others, though he felt their agreement in the quiet. "We want what Silas promised and did not honor. Real partnership. Not a man lording over us and not us ruling a man. We share the labor and the profit. We share the risks that come with both. And," she added after a steady pause, "we share the rest of life as it unfolds. Company, care. The kind of belonging a place like this demands if it is going to last." The words did not feel like a trap. They felt like a road with no signposts. Eli heard his own heartbeat in his ears. "You are 3, he said slowly, trying to set the thought down where it would not spook. "Since he left, you have stood together. That is what you are asking me to join. If I do, it will not be for lack of better choices, and it will not be for show." Clara colored, the faintest warmth rising to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. After Silas left, we were 3 against a wide world. It was survival first. Then it was comfort. We did not plan it. It grew because no one else would guard what was ours. We will not make a show of it for anybody. We will make a home. Her voice had no tremor in it. It had steel and it had mercy. Josie stepped closer, stance still combative, but her eyes softer at the edges. "Folks out here measure sin by distance to town and who is gossiping that week. We do not have time for that. We mean to build and to be honest with each other. That is the whole of it. If it does not fit, we will say so like grown people and mend what can be mended." Eli felt the ground tilt beneath old habits. He had come west to put space between himself and entanglements. Yet here was an entanglement that looked less like a noose and more like a net that could keep a man from going under. He swallowed and nodded once. "If I am to judge a partnership, I need to see the work. Words are wind. Show me the proof of your hands." Relief flickered across Maeve's face before her composure settled. "Of course," she said. "Clara, take him to the head gate. Show him what you cut from the spring. Josie, bring the ledger to the kitchen and have it ready when we come back." She spoke like a captain setting a course, but there was pride in the way she said Clara's name, and pride again when she said Josie's. Clara led him off the porch and down the packed path that threaded between house and barn. The air smelled of sun-warmed pine and damp earth. A pair of saddle horses flicked their tails in the corral, heads turning as the 2 of them passed. Beyond the barn, a rise lifted toward a stand of cottonwoods where the spring seeped out of a rocky lip. The hillside wore a new geometry, carved by stubborn hands. "We found the vein last winter," Clara said as they climbed. "It ran cold, but steady under the crust. In spring thaw, it swelled and wasted itself down a gully." She stopped at a newly built headgate framed in squared timbers. "We cut the box here, set the gate, and took the drop slow through a feeder ditch. You can throttle it by the handle there." The wood was smooth where a palm would land. Eli crouched to look. The carpentry was clean. The slope had been measured by an eye that knew how water thinks. He followed the channel down the grade to a spread of smaller runs that stepped across the slope like lines in a palm. The water moved quiet and sure, finding every furrow, shining where it slipped past rows of young grain just high enough to ripple when the breeze touched it. "You did this by yourselves," he said, not as a challenge, but as a tally of respect. Clara stood with her hands on her hips and nodded once. "All winter," she said. "When the ground fought us, we waited for a thaw. When the thaw fought us, we braced the banks with brush and moved on. Maeve hauled stone. Josie kept the crews fed when traders came to barter a day of labor for a sack of oats. We paid in beef, in blankets we wove, in whatever we had that could be spared." She pointed to the far edge of the field. "Those rows will be ready to cut before the dust of August settles. We will have hay stacked high enough to shade a man." They walked the length of the waterworks while afternoon light slid toward evening. Eli ran his hand along a plank here, a brace there, testing for wobble and finding none. He asked small questions about winter flow and silt and how they handled seepage into the lower pasture. Clara answered in the language of a builder who had made mistakes and learned from each one without wasting the lesson. At the foot of the field, the channel split and feathered into garden beds bordered by stones. Beans were tented on poles and corn stood in straight-backed ranks. A patch of squash wandered where it pleased, and a row of late cabbage already shouldered up tight. The work was not showy. It was the kind of steady improvement that turned scarcity into surplus. Clara paused and looked back toward the house. "You wanted proof," she said. "That is what we have. Ditches that hold, soil that rests and then gives back, trade routes that do not leave us begging at the mercy of one buyer. We deal in dry gulch, in red rock, and sometimes down to Dusty Hollow if the weather holds. We haul in salt, iron nails, seed, and we haul out meat and grain. What we need is not a savior. What we need is a partner who will not run when the wind shifts." Eli followed her gaze to the porch where Maeve stood with a hand in the small of Josie's back as they went inside. He thought of the clause on the paper, the one that tried to name a life without saying it outright. He could argue the law until snow fell on the ridges, or he could admit what his eyes were telling him. The ranch was sound under their care. The rest of it, the part men called companionship, because the truth was too big for their mouths, would be a choice made day by day. He looked at Clara and felt the balance in his chest settle. "I asked for proof, and you gave it," he said. "I will not answer more than that today, but I will not pretend I did not see what I saw. The water runs where you send it. That counts for something." He straightened and offered the contract back. "Tomorrow, I will want to see the books and the herd. Tonight, I will sleep on it under your roof if you will have me, and in the morning I will speak plain." Clara held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "That will do. Mr. Carter, come on. Josie will have the ledger set out, and Maeve will make sure you eat before you decide the fate of the world." The faintest smile tugged at her mouth. "Out here, we do not decide anything worthwhile on an empty stomach." The afternoon light washed over the fields as Clara Boone walked Eli through the water channels she had carved with her own 2 hands. Her voice carried both pride and bitterness as she explained the months of labor that had gone into cutting the ditches and shaping the soil. Eli listened carefully, noting the precision in her work and the quiet satisfaction beneath her tone. He could almost see Silas Granger swaggering through the same fields, taking credit for what these women had bled to build. Clara's jaw tightened at the mention of his name, yet her eyes shone with pride in what had endured despite him. By the time Josie McGraw joined them near the corrals, Eli had already begun to see the ranch with different eyes. The pastures stretched green and strong, dotted with cattle that moved slow and healthy under the sun. Josie's manner shifted when she spoke of the herds. Her voice grew brisk, confident, every word tinged with the sharp edge of a businesswoman who understood margins and markets as well as any banker back east. She showed him the chicken coop, modest but clean, and described how they rotated egg sales through settlements like Dry Gulch and Red Rock to keep steady coin coming in. "This is not survival anymore," Josie told him. "It is prosperity, if handled wisely. We keep the land working. It keeps us working." Eli nodded, genuinely impressed. These women had not only kept Silver Creek Ranch alive, they had turned it into something thriving. The place carried the marks of order, forethought, and grit. It was not luck keeping the wheels turning. It was labor and unity and sacrifice. As they headed back toward the house, Maeve Hollister walked alongside him. Her voice, strong and steady, softened when she spoke of the home they had built inside those walls. "The house has 4 bedrooms," she said. 3 of them are ours. The last one. We always hoped it might not stay empty forever." Her words hung between them, heavy with implication, but absent of pressure. Inside, the farmhouse was plain but welcoming. Wooden beams showed the strength of careful carpentry. The kitchen was wide enough for several hands to work side by side. A sitting room near the hearth bore quilts stitched in patterns that spoke of long nights by lamplight. Nothing was grand, yet every corner carried the imprint of care. Eli found himself struck not by what was lacking, but by how much love was stitched into the place. They gathered in the sitting room as twilight deepened. Clara poured coffee while Josie stacked the ledger on the table. Maeve rested a hand lightly on Eli's arm, the briefest touch, but enough to set his heart into a strange rhythm. Clara smiled at him from across the firelight, her eyes full of warmth and quiet understanding. Josie sat straight-backed, her gaze sharp but her spirit unbowed. "You do not have to decide tonight," Clara said gently. "What we are asking is no small matter. Take time to be sure." Eli nodded, though in his heart he already knew. The bond he felt was not mere attraction. It was belonging, the kind of connection he had long denied himself. He realized with startling clarity that what they offered was not chains, but the possibility of something freer than any life he had known. "What comes next?" he asked, his voice low. The 3 women smiled, and in that expression was all the answer he needed. The question itself was his commitment. That evening they shared supper in the kitchen. The food was simple stew, fresh bread, milk cooled in the spring, but the company turned the meal into something richer than any banquet. Eli listened as the women traded talk of crop yields and cattle prices, of barter routes that carried them to Red Rock and Dusty Hollow. He found himself speaking too, sharing thoughts on rotation of pasture and market timing. Their partnership already felt real, alive around the table. As dishes were cleared, Maeve spoke in a tone that hushed the room. "There is more you should know." Eli set down the plate he had been drying. "What is it?" Maeve's jaw tightened before Josie opened a drawer and pulled free a heavy ledger. She laid it flat and opened the pages. Columns of figures lined the paper, and Eli's heart sank at the sight. Silas left us more than broken promises. Josie said, he left debt supplies taken on credit, equipment ordered in our name. He used our reputation to get goods he never paid for, then rode away before the accounts came due. How much? Eli asked, his voice grim. Clara looked down, her voice quiet. Enough to ruin us if we cannot settle it within the month. The traders have been patient, because they trust the work they see here. But patience runs thin. When it breaks, all of this goes with it. Eli flipped through the columns, his business sense clicking into place even as anger boiled within him at Silas Granger's betrayal. The debts were heavy, yes, but not impossible. The productivity of the ranch gave him hope. These women had laid everything bare to him when they could have concealed it. Their honesty struck him as much as their courage. Silas, did you a cruelty, Eli said, setting the ledger down. But these numbers, these I can handle. I sold off land back east before I came here. If we pool what I have with what this ranch already produces, we can cover these accounts and more. The effect was immediate. Maeve's shoulders shook as she let out a breath she had been holding for months. For the first time since Eli had met her, tears welled in her eyes and fell freely. Clara gripped his hand, firm and steady. Josie said nothing, but the fire in her green eyes dimmed into something softer, almost tender. But I have conditions, Eli continued, his voice sharpening. If we are to do this, we do it properly. Partnership papers filed in Fort Bridger, clear rights, clear responsibilities, decisions made together. And as for the rest, he looked at each of them in turn. We take our time. No demands. No rushing. Whatever bonds grow between us will be natural, not forced. Maeve wiped her cheeks and smiled through the tears. That is all we ever wanted. A man who would stand beside us, not over us. A true partner. That night, long after the lamps burned low, they spoke together of the future of fields to expand, debts to settle, new trade routes to try. Eli realized that what had begun as the worst bargain of his life might instead prove to be the best chance he had ever taken. 3 months later, he stood again in the yard where he had first met them. The ranch had changed. The herds had multiplied. The irrigation ran stronger, feeding fields that now reached farther into the valley. Trade routes stretched into 3 territories, bringing coin and supplies beyond their early hopes. More than that, their lives had found a rhythm that balanced work and affection, duty and laughter. Maeve Hollister had become his closest confidant in matters of strategy, her natural leadership sharpening his own business sense. Their bond, born of respect, had ripened into quiet affection that neither had expected, but both welcomed. Clara Boone's steady wisdom and her inventiveness in the fields had made her indispensable. The hours they shared in labor grew into something gentler, something that made Eli feel grounded in ways he had never known. Josie McGraw had taken longer to yield her trust, but when she did, it was with a passion that burned fierce and true. Eli would never forget the first time she pressed a kiss against him in the midst of repairing a broken fence. Laughter in her eyes, strength in her arms. Together, the 4 of them had created not just a profitable ranch, but a family of their own choosing. It was not without challenge. There were jealousies to temper, decisions to share, compromises to strike, but what they had built was strong, stronger than any of them alone. As the sun sank over Silver Creek Ranch, Eli stood on the porch with Maeve at his side, Clara and Josie bringing mugs of coffee. He looked out over the land, rich with promise, and thought of the path that had led him here. Once he had sought solitude, now he had found something far greater belonging. Josephine McGraw had been the last to yield her heart, though perhaps the truest sign of her devotion came in its suddenness. One crisp morning, while she and Eli mended a stretch of fence that the spring storms had battered down, she leaned over without hesitation and pressed her lips against his. It was not a planned gesture, not even one she seemed to have considered until that very instant. Yet it carried with it a heat and a certainty that spoke louder than words. That kiss marked the moment when their unusual arrangement stopped being a precarious experiment and became something undeniably real. What had once seemed impossible, that a rancher from the East could share not only work but a life with 3 women bound together by betrayal, had blossomed into something steady and vibrant. They had forged their own definition of family, their own rules of love, and the home they created at Silver Creek Ranch was unlike any other in the Wyoming Territory. There were challenges, to be sure. Jealousies had flared, and decisions were not always easy when 4 voices sought to be heard equally. Yet each difficulty had been met with patience, honesty, and the understanding that what they were building was bigger than any one of them alone. Society beyond their fence lines might have scorned them, might have called their choices unholy or strange, but within the borders of Silver Creek, they had carved out something sacred, something durable. By midsummer, their legal papers had been drawn up and notarized in Fort Bridger. The partnership was now official, signed with clear agreements of profit sharing and rights to the land. Silas Granger's debts, once a shadow threatening to consume the ranch, were paid in full with Eli's capital and the hard work of the 3 women. The relief of that burden being lifted was palpable. Maeve's shoulders loosened, as if she had set down a pack she had carried too long. Clara's quiet laughter returned to the evenings. Josie allowed herself to dream of futures rather than only survival. The ranch itself grew stronger with every passing week. New rooms were added to the main house, an office where they kept ledgers and trade contracts, a pantry big enough to store the goods brought from Dry Gulch and Red Rock, and a porch long enough for them all to gather in the cool of the evening. Eli marveled sometimes at how quickly the operation had turned around. He had once sought only solitude and a place to start again. Now he found himself at the center of a partnership that thrived in every sense. Each woman brought a strength that carried the ranch forward. Maeve Hollister, with her natural authority, had become his closest counsel in matters of strategy. She could look at a season's forecasts and know when to hold cattle, when to sell, when to invest in more hands. Clara Boone carried an inventiveness that never ceased to amaze him. Her irrigation systems had transformed fields that others would have left barren, and her wisdom kept them from rushing decisions. Josie McGraw was passion itself, fierce in her loyalty and sharp in her bargaining. Traders learned quickly that she could not be cheated, and those who tried left lighter in pocket and heavier with respect. And Eli, once a man adrift, searching only for distance from a past that weighed him down, had found his purpose not in the land alone, but in the bond he shared with them. As summer ripened into fall, the 4 of them often gathered on the wide porch that now framed the house. They would sit with mugs of coffee or glasses of whiskey, watching the sun sink over fields of golden hay and grazing cattle. One evening, Maeve leaned against Eli, her voice quieter than usual. "Any regrets?" she asked. Clara and Josie came with steaming cups and joined them, the night air thick with the peace of acceptance. Eli looked at each of them in turn. These women who had once confronted him with a demand that had felt more like a threat than a promise. These women who had turned his fear into belonging. His chest tightened with the weight of gratitude. Only one, he admitted. Their eyes flickered with surprise until he added, "I regret that Silas's treachery was the path that brought me here. We could have been living this life even sooner." The laughter that followed rang clear across the yard, carried out over fields that now bore proof of their labor and devotion. It was not the brittle laughter of survival, but the deep, full laughter of people who had discovered where they were meant to be. In that moment, Eli knew, with a certainty as solid as the land beneath his boots, that no convention or lawman's opinion could diminish what they had built. In a world that prized conformity, they had chosen connection. In a society bound by rigid rules, they had written their own. The frontier was a harsh master, but in that choice they had found something to endure every storm. The night deepened, stars bright over Silver Creek Ranch, and the four of them sat together in companionable silence. Eli thought of the man he had been when he first rode up the trail, tired, suspicious, ready to fight for solitude. He thought of the women who had stood on the porch that day, hard-eyed and wary, defending what little they had left. Now, they were not enemies. They were not even separate pieces trying to patch together a fragile alliance. They were a family, bound by choice and strengthened by the land they worked. When Josie slipped her hand into his, Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, and Maeve's low laugh rumbled in the cool night. Eli Carter knew without question that the life he had stumbled into so unexpected, so unconventional, was exactly the life he had been meant to find. At its heart, this story isn't simply about a man and three women. It's about choices, trust, and the courage to build family where society says it shouldn't exist. Eli Carter arrived at Silver Creek Ranch seeking solitude. What he found instead was connection, something he didn't even know he was missing. For those of us with more years behind us than ahead, it's easy to believe that change is no longer possible, but this tale reminds us that new chapters can begin at any age, and often in the most unexpected ways. Betrayal, hardship, and loneliness can shape us, but they don't have to define us. With honesty, patience, and the willingness to stand together, people can create bonds that are stronger than convention and richer than what the world expects. Perhaps the lesson is, this family is not always the one you're born into. It can be the one you choose, the one you fight for, and the one that surprises you when you least expect it. And love is not bound by rules. It's bound by hearts that are willing to risk. Thank you, friends, for sharing your time with us on this journey into the wild frontier of love and resilience. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another tale. Your support keeps these stories alive, and we're grateful for every one of you.